Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Care Court Grants Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, use the raised hand feature. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference and to please be aware of your surroundings behind you. All LSTFC and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Enable auto transcription. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we do a roll call?
Yes. All right. Commissioner Blakemore?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell?
Present.
Commissioner Escobedo? Absent. Commissioner Morales? Absent. Commissioner Klein? Absent. Commissioner Pryor?
Here.
And Chair Iskin.
Here.
Right.
And how about staff liaisons?
We'll move on to liaisons. Selena?
Lauren Klein here for LAC.
Thank you. Laura Brown?
Present.
And Melanie Snyder.
Present.
And then for staff, I am here. Chris, I see you. Alexa, who's our note taker, is present. And no representatives from OGC.
Okay.
And then you might need to state for the record, Helen, if there's a quorum.
We do not have quorum. There is no vote for today's meeting and do not require quorum.
That was expected.
Yes, which was expected. Thank you, Chris.
Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment? Okay.
If so, please, you can use the raise hand feature if you do.
Are we seeing anything?
No, there's no one indicating that they'd like to speak.
Okay. So as suggested by, I guess, Chris's comments, this is a meeting that we don't really require a quorum for. It's not an action item meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to continue to discuss the formula for allocating the reduced amount of care court funds. I say reduced amount because it's substantially reduced from the governor's original proposal among the counties. And you may recall that when we first came out with the RFP, we were proposing, or the number, the allocation scheme that we put out, we recognized that we may need to tweak it, but was the one that we used last year, which was to allocate whatever funding was available to the counties based on their percent of the state's population, subject to a floor of $60,000. That's the approach we used last year. However, when we applied, and last year it made sense, it sort of worked because we had $47 million and the $60,000 ended up going to rather small counties. The other counties seemed to get a decent amount of money based on 47 million. This year, with the amount of something like 17 million, which I think is now close to final, right? I mean, it may not have been, the legislature, or the governor may not have totally signed off on the approach, but I think we're pretty convinced that we have something like 17 million to distribute. And if you use that number and allocate it by general population to the counties with a $60,000 floor, the results ended up looking weird, not appropriate, not fair, not appropriate, because we ended up giving a $60,000 floor to just a wide range of counties, some of which had very low populations like Alpine, which has 1,500 people. And then we had a few other counties below 30,000. But then that $60,000 floor was also being given to counties that had significantly more people, that were in the 60, 70,000, 100,000 range. So we thought that just didn't seem right. We thought we were giving too much to the really small counties and really not enough to some of the larger counties. So we've been playing around with the numbers, and we've kind of come up with an alternative approach that has a series of tiers, if you will, based on population. And Helen's going to go over the spreadsheet, but the idea is that the smallest counties would get $30,000 on an annual basis. And we'll talk about proration in a minute. So that would be like 0 to 30,000. And then the next tier we came up with was 30,001 to 100,000, and they would get more. I think it was 50,000 before proration, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Helen. And then we had a third tier of 100,001 to 200,000 that would get $80,000. And then everyone above that, every county above 200,000 would get their allocated amount just based on general population. And we further tweaked that approach with the idea of prorating counties based upon their estimated start date. So the allocation that we are making is a July 1 to June 30 number, but there are a number of counties, many of them that are not starting their care court until December 1. So we thought it was fair to prorate, in other words, to take away a little bit of money, or about a quarter of the year. The reason a quarter of the year is because the approach we used last year was to take the start date and then move it back a couple of months to give counties a little time to ramp up. So what we did was that we prorated the December 1 counties to October 1, I think, which would be 3/4 of the year. And then the counties starting July 1 would get the full year plus whatever money, plus a share of the money that's being freed up by this proration. So that's the approach that we used. And Helen or Chris or Catherine, let me know if I said any of that incorrectly, or if you want to add something to what I just said. And then otherwise, we'll share the spreadsheet and show you what the result is.
Yeah, that's accurate. I do want to note for the record that we do have quorum. We have 4 commissioners of a committee of 7. So that's a correction from the statement earlier before that we do not. Chris, I saw your hand raised first, and then Catherine. Oh, sorry, Eric. I am calling on people with their raised hand.
Oh, I was just going to note that since I was just so the chair knows that since we asked for public comment, we had like one member of the public at that moment. Now I see we have 11. So I'm just going to say for everyone, the formal public comment period was at the very, very start of the meeting. Additional public comment periods are subject to the chair's discretion. I was just going to suggest, I see we have a few people from public defenders' offices who currently receive care court funds. I think there might be a couple from counties that would start getting it in the next state fiscal year. So just Eric, just so you know, if it felt appropriate to you during the meeting and you wanted to do like a second public comment period after everyone has a chance to see the numbers, there might be folks who have reactions, but that it's at your discretion.
Okay. Thank you for that. Catherine, did you have a comment as well?
I was just going to thank the staff for working with Eric and me over the last probably month or so in an effort to find some solutions. And I think I learned 2 things. It's like, this was an effort, I think, as Eric suggested, to create some equity among the counties, depending on their population size, recognizing that in California, we have really little counties and really quite large counties. And I'll just add, I think all of us that were working on this learned a great deal about the population size of many of California's 58 counties. So anyway, look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, I guess I want to also say that when you see the spreadsheet, you'll see that the smallest counties, we've proposed $30,000. And for those that are not starting till December 1, they would get $22,500, which may at first glance seem like not very much money, and it's not. But if you also think about the estimated number of cases that those counties are expected to need to serve, you'll see that actually their dollars per case, the smallest counties, I did a little calculation, I could show you this, are actually significantly larger than the largest counties, who are anticipated to have far more cases. So the number looks small, but the case estimates are also small, and the dollars per case are actually pretty substantial. So don't be
Would it be
shocked.
helpful, Eric, for Helen to start sharing her screen
Yeah, I think she should.
with the slide? It just and Helen, like, just for I'm thinking of those in the members of the public, some of the public defender offices. You might even, just before showing the numbers, I know you have a slide that kind of summarizes in like 4 bullet points the stuff that Eric just described. You might just want to like hit that one more time so it sinks in, and then show the big epic table that will probably be on the screen for most of the meeting.
Sure. Yes, if I happen to not do that, I think I know what you're talking about, Chris, but if I happen to not do it, please feel free to interrupt me. Just making sure everyone can see my screen. Okay, great.
Sorry, yeah, so we can see that.
So this is item 3.1, discuss the county allocations for the 2024-2025 Care Court funds. Subject to the Budget Act of 2024. That's the agenda item as posted, but we do have an update on the Budget Act as well, included in the slides. I will start by just briefly going over data from the quarterly reports. This is for reporting period October 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. This is a table showing the cases that have opened through March 31st. Data for the third quarter is due on July 15th for cohort 1 counties. And the total cases through March 31st is 350. And this is to help provide context for today's discussion. And I'll briefly go over some background. For the Budget Act of 2024, the governor signed the Budget Act of 2024 yesterday, which confirms the amount of funding for care court services starting July 1st. Counties will have until January 2026 to spend down the funds. The funding amounts are at least $16,750,000 to represent respondents. That $16.75 million figure is based on case-wide, statewide estimates for petitions, which is 3,350, which amounts to exactly 5,000 per petition. Up to 838,000 to provide funding for legal training and technical assistance. Of that 838,000, up to 275,000 may be transferred to the Office of the State Public Defender to provide legal training and technical assistance to QLSPs and public defender offices, and 1,173,000 to cover the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission and State Bar administrative costs. This next couple of slides will be about the county allocations when we apply prorating and funding floors. Just as a friendly reminder, the committee noted in the request for proposals that it planned to revisit county allocations if care court funding was much lower than anticipated in the governor's January proposal. Given that the governors may revise, as well as the legislature's budget bill proposed a significant decrease, staff worked with 2 committee members to assess possible adjustments to the allocations. The first possible adjustment is to prorate each county's start date for care court. Most counties plan to launch December 1st. For those counties with a December 1st start date, they would receive 9 months of funding. That would cover 2 months of startup costs. I will note that Kern County is starting care court on October 1st and would also be included to receive 9 months of funding. They would not receive startup funding. Doing so requires Kern County to operate on a separate agreement timeline for most cohort 2 counties, and then for staff to create a third calculation for prorating. Cohort 1 and San Mateo County, San Mateo County has decided to launch care court earlier on July 1st. They would receive 12 months of funding, which means there would be no prorating, and then prorated funds would be respread amongst these counties.
Are you also going to talk about carryover?
Yes, so for cohort 1, the 2023-2024 funds, cohort 1 would be allowed to carry over those funds.
To
And
carry,
that's inclusive of LA, cohort 1 and LA both. Yeah.
to carry over any funds that they have not spent, that they were to which they were allocated, that were allocated to them, these counties during the first year. And I think it's important to note that I don't think any county fully spent the fund, any of the cohort 1 counties, including LA, fully spent the money that they were allocated for the first year.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more to that, so originally for the 23-24 funding recipients, which are the 7 cohort 1 counties in LA, the language of the Budget Act of 2023, so that was last year's Budget Act, had the default interpretation that the funds needed to be spent down by the end of the state fiscal year. It's kind of like, unless it says otherwise, that's usually the sort of interpretive default. So the State Bar received clarification or an update that for 23-24 funds, those the public defender's offices and the 2 QLSPs and the Office of the State Public Defender can spend those down through this December 31, 2024. So that amounts to a 6-month, essentially like an extension to keep spending it for another 6 months. And then recognizing that that was good public policy, it's my understanding that the Budget Act of 2024 just continued that for 24-25 funds. So for all of the funding that Helen's about to talk about, the 16,750,000 minimum, that's gonna, even though the state fiscal year will end on June 30th, 2025, about a year from today, those funds can also be spent down through January 1 of 2026. So they like, the statute just kind of said, you know what, that was a good idea. Let's just write that in, that they'll get, you get essentially like a year and a half to spend them down.
Move on to the next slide. All right, the second possible adjustment is to recalibrate the minimum amount of funding. In the next few slides, you'll see example allocations using the RFP's funding floor of 60,000 and then a 3-tier approach that reflects the lower amount in the Budget Act. Allocations for counties under the floor amount would better reflect their population sizes and need. For example, the smallest county under the funding floor would not get the same amount as the largest one, and the highest funding floor would still be 60,000 after prorating for start date, which matches the original amount in the RFP's estimated floor. So the next couple of slides are tables. Chris, is this where you wanted me to hold it for a bit?
That was great. Yeah, I just wanted to, if you were going to skip over a few of the slides, I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure you at least presented those last 2 with the adjustment 1, adjustment 2 before showing all the numbers, because
Yeah.
Eric described all that, but
Yeah.
I think it helps to hear it twice. Yeah.
Great. So I'll pause for a bit just because there are a lot of numbers and a lot of text on each of these slides. So I'll pause for a bit on each one.
Well, it may be useful to just take a couple examples of the various tiers. So for example, Alpine is an example of what you might call a tier 1 county. It's in the group of counties with smaller population. It has a population, as you can see, of 1,515. And under the approach that we came out with for last year, they would get a floor, that county, of $60,000, which just didn't seem appropriate given how small they are. Under the 3-tier approach, they would be in the tier 1 smallest tier. They would get $30,000. Under the approach for last year, if they would have gotten $60,000 on a year-wide basis, since they're not starting till December 1, they would have gotten $45,000. But under this year's modified approach, where they start off with 30, they're prorated down to 22,000. And so that's what they would end up with. The column that says the 3 funding floors after prorating is what the committee is proposing that the bottom line would be for various counties. So that's an example of a small county. Bottom line is they would get a small county starting December 1 would get 30,000 prorated or 22,500. And coincidentally, Amador is an example of the next tier. Their population is 37,000, so they have more than 30,000, less than 100,000. So I'm just going to skip to the new approach. The new approach under the 3 funding floors, they would get $50,000, but they're not starting till December 1, so they're prorated down to $37,500. And so you can see the difference between the approach from last year and the approach from this year. Alpine gets 22,500 less, and Amador gets 7,500 less.
Is that less from the 60,000 or the
Yes.
difference between
The difference between the prorated amount they would have gotten under last year's approach and the prorated amount they get under this 3-tier approach.
That's correct. And I'll also note on this slide, we have an example of the largest county, which is Humboldt, who has a population between 101,000 and 200,000. At their prorated amounts, they would be in that, they would get the highest funding floor, which is 80,000, and then prorated to 60,000 because they are starting December 1st.
So Humboldt would get $15,000 more under this year's approach than they would have gotten under last year. Under last year's approach, they would have been one of those larger counties that would have been stuck with a $60,000 floor, but we've now moved that floor up to 80,000. And so since they're starting on December 1, they would get 60,000. If they were starting on July 1, they would have gotten 80,000. And you see they end up getting more. So this approach, the bottom line is that it takes money away, if you will, from the smallest counties. When I say takes away, it takes away from what they would have gotten under last year's approach, but it delivers a little more money to the midterm or the mid-range counties that have higher populations, and then also some money to the larger counties.
I do want to note that the tables that you'll see in the next few slides are current as of yesterday. They're for discussion for today's discussion, and subject to change should anything different come up during today's discussion, or the committee chooses otherwise.
That's perfect. I was just gonna say, for those who I just realized we hadn't said that, like the today's meeting, or actually Eric did suggest at the beginning, is a discussion, and this committee will be exercising authority that has been delegated to it by the full Legal Services Trust Fund Commission to finalize the allocation formula. And if you are one of our 24-25 QLSPs that is receiving an award, your award amount at its meeting that is scheduled for July 15th. That is when the decision will be made by public resolution. And so for today, if you're listening and you have a reaction and you want to share that with State Bar staff, the decision isn't being made today, and I think input is welcome. Helen does have on the later slides the proposed / example amount for every county. So Helen, I think as you go through them, like you said, just linger. If for folks who are watching, look for your county's name. Like Eric just said, that if it's a lot of numbers. So if you just want the big takeaway, it's the second to last column. That's essentially what is being proposed today. It's the column that's titled 3 funding floors after prorating by start date. So that's if you're just, need to know, like, what's your number? The final column is just showing the difference between what the number would have been under the RFP that was released in April, that assumed a statewide funding figure for Respondents Council of closer to $50 million. I'm sorry, Helen, if I misremember that. I think 48 million to 50 million. The number that we actually have to administer is much lower. It's under 17 million before rolling over funds for legal TTA. And so that is why the funding floor is being revisited. So in any case, one funding floor was tied to a much higher amount of funding for the entire state than what is actually available. 3 funding floors is calibrated to the lower amount. So 3 funding floors after prorating by your county start date is the number to pay attention to. Sorry, Helen, I'm just saying that multiple times, just for folks listening, watching, maybe hearing this for the first time.
No worries.
Repetition will be helpful.
So I'll go to the next slide with more counties, and I'll linger for a bit.
And while we're lingering on these slides, Helen, I just realized, I think on the previous slides where you had the nice succinct descriptions of adjustment 1, adjustment 2, adjustment 1 being the prorating by start date, and with startup costs for most counties going in December, and adjustment 2 being the multi-tier funding floor. I realize I don't think we actually had on there what the population cutoffs were for, and I'm sorry if we did and I just missed it. But if we didn't, do you want to say what those were out loud?
Yeah,
For the three funding
you
floors?
did not miss it. So for the first funding floor, the population cutoff is 0 to 30,000. The funding floor there is 30,000. The second population cutoff is 30,001 to 100,000. The funding floor there is 50,000, and the tier 3 for the population cutoff is 101,000 to 200. And the funding floor there is 80,000. So they are 30,000 increments.
So to model it for you, just staying on this slide, Inyo County with its general population of 18,434, before prorating by start date, some counties are going in December, some are going on July 1. So before prorating by start date, Inyo County gets the $30,000 funding floor. It's actually probably a pretty good boost for them. And that's tied to their general population. Prorated for their start date, because Inyo is going in December, it's 22,500. Continuing to just demonstrate it, Lake County with 66,691 is getting the funding floor of 50,000. All of these counties are getting bumped up from what they would get if it was just their general population-based allocation. Prorated by start date, because it goes in December, it would get 37,500. And then finally, Madera, with its population of 150,314, would get $80,000 funding floor. It's a boost. Prorated by start date down to 60,000. For historical context, the RFP had aspired, given a statewide funding amount of closer to 50 million, to give everyone a $60,000 funding floor. But that would, the committee and state bar staff feels it is appropriate to calibrate that to the what is, I think is like a 60+% decrease in the amount of funds statewide. That reflects a revised estimate for the number of initial petitions or initial hearings. Sorry, petitions or initial hearings. I can't remember which one, but I think it's about the same.
Helen or Chris, could you please say the 3 population cutoff numbers one more time?
Sure, it's 0 to 30,000, 30,001 to 100,000, and then 100,001 to 200,000.
And the numbers for each of those tiers for prorating are 30,000 for the smallest counties, 50,000 for the 30,001 to 100,000, and 80,000 for 100,001 to 200,000.
Thank you, Eric.
And I think you all know who you are, but if you are in cohort 1 or LA, I'm so sorry if I forget it. So, but if you just need to hear it, I mean, going from like north to south in my head, but like Glenn, Tuolumne, Stanislaus, Orange County, Los Angeles, San Diego, Riverside. Who did I miss? San Francisco. You would be in San Mateo County now, you would not be prorated down by start date because your county will have launched CareCourt by July 1. So if you were getting the funding floor, so that would be, I believe, probably Glenn, Tuolumne, you will just get the full funding floor, no prorating.
So it's Catherine, I was just going to note, I mean, I think it's evident from the chart, the 3 funding floors are the ones that get this set amount. The rest of the counties, so counties above a population of 200,001, just operate by general population, as I understand it. That's why you see counties like Los Angeles getting a very large amount, because that's their pro rata population of the general population. So just wanted to make that clear if that wasn't.
Yeah, so it starts with the general population based allocation, which is also what the committee and commission had as the very first step in the equation last year, which was in line with guidance that the state bar received from other implementing agencies. And Helen, maybe feel free to go to the next one just to like let that, those counties linger if anyone's eager to see these ones. The funding floor, and truly, if your number looks maybe a little bit low, do take into account just like if we really just used your general population, the funding floor is actually really helping you out, and the prorating is reflective of the fact that your county might be only operating care court for 7 months of the state fiscal year, and you would be getting at least 2 months of startup funding, or 2 months of startup funding. And I was gonna make one more point about general population, but
I guess I
forgot
want
it, so I'll stop.
to make one point as well. I think the estimate for the number of cases, if I recall the number, and Helen, correct me if I'm wrong, statewide for 24-25 is something like 3,350. Am I right about that?
Yes.
That's correct. 3,350
So
is the
if-
statewide estimate.
That's the estimate. Of course, it's just an estimate. Who knows whether that's going to be right or wrong. But if you actually just take that number for a moment, and then you allocate that number by county based upon population, if you look, for example, at the smaller counties, you say, well, they're only getting 22,500. But in fact, if you allocate the 3,350 by population to those counties, counties like Inyo, which has a population of 18,400, are anticipated to get like 1.6 cases, right? So they're not getting much money, but they're also not expected to have hardly any cases. So they're actually getting, if you think about it that way, dollars per case, they're actually getting, you could argue that they're getting kind of a windfall based upon, compared to even the larger counties that are getting a lot more money, but expect to have a whole lot more cases.
If you're looking at the total row at the very bottom, you may recall we were saying it's the Budget Act 2024 provides 16,750,000 for Respondents Council, and you'll see here it's summing to 17,288,000. As Helen mentioned earlier, as a reminder, if there are any funds left over from the set aside for legal training and technical assistance to Respondents Council, the budget provides that those funds roll over to Respondents Council. And so we do anticipate most of those funds actually rolling over. So that's why the number's a little higher. As Helen mentioned, there's at least one support center that has been approved for a grant to provide legal training and technical assistance. So their funds are not included here. And then also the Office of the State Public Defender has a line in the Budget Act where they will very likely be getting some funding to support Respondents Council. So those funds, that $275,000 is not included here, but the rest is.
So let me pause now for a moment. I understand from Chris that there are a number of members of the public that are listening in. I know we're throwing a lot of numbers at you, but does anybody in the public, any member of the public have any questions? And let me know if there are any raised hands.
There
Ready?
are no raised hands.
Sorry?
There are no raised hands.
Okay.
And also, I'd say, I always feel very guilty putting you on the spot, but I don't know if Melanie or Laura has any reactions from the Judicial Council. It's okay if you don't, but yeah.
Yeah, I will just say that, all of this is based on only 1 year of pilot for a very few number of counties, but it seems right that these cuts are, right sizing things. So I actually think that for the court's position, getting too much money is almost as bad as getting not enough money. So having this very thoughtful approach just is something that's really appreciated. Really, again, I know that it's difficult because it required you to do some calculation and some more calculations, but really, I think that the more you try to fit this, the better it's looking. And what we saw in cohort 1, again, I think this will fit. So just want to say thanks for all your hard work.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that comment.
And I see Lauren has her hand raised, and then Eric, a member of the public, has also raised their hand.
Okay, Lauren, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to echo the thanks. I know a lot of work went into this, and it seems like a a very workable solution. I just had one question, which is about San Francisco County, which is obviously of interest to me because that is the only county where there were legal aid organizations funded last year. How does this reallocation of the prorated funds impact San Francisco? I'm curious how much of a cut there is over last year to the funding compared to, you know, how much funding the organizations applied for and kind of what that looks like.
Let's show San Francisco.
Scroll over. So at with the governor's January proposal, San Francisco, it's actually not on this.
Let's not talk about the 45 million because that's just not realistic. Let's just look at the 17 million.
Yeah, so San Francisco with this allocation, since they're a 12-month county, they would get the 445,539. During the Legal Trust Fund Commission meeting last week, we did, staff did note that the awards, that it would be likely at this funding that the commission would not be able to award both of the QLSPs that applied at their full requests. Both of the QLSPs did express that they would be interested and willing to take an amount that's proportional to what they applied for. So as we have this number now, staff can go back and calculate what that might look like.
So Lauren,
No,
answer your question. San Francisco would get more under this 3-floor funding approach than they would have gotten under last year's approach, about $6,400 more. And that's because, and that's true generally of the larger counties, and that's the result of essentially taking some money away from the smallest counties and ends up reallocating them to the larger counties. And don't forget also, in addition to this 445, 579, 35 that you see here, San Francisco will have the carryover from last year.
Got it. Thank you.
I think the carryover is a big deal to at least one of the 2 QLSPs that's been approved for an award. Like that was just to be transparent and honest, that I think that allowed them to say that they could take that they might be able to take a proportionally lower award is because they're getting this carryover.
We have someone from the public or maybe multiple people from the public who want to comment. So why don't we turn to that?
Did you want to limit the time for public comment to 3 minutes, the normal amount, or did you want to do more?
Yes, let's limit it to 3 minutes. It's a good suggestion. Anyone from the public who's commenting, please announce your name and who you're representing, if you're representing an organization or a county.
I was just unmuted, so I'm assuming it's me. I'm Carrie Klein. I am the public defender of Nevada County. I have a little bit of concern about these new allocations for those very small counties. Many of them are in legal deserts, and I'm wondering if you've spoken to the counties about whether they believe they can actually get adequate representation for people for the reduced numbers.
Take a look at that.
And I frankly am not talking about my county. I'm not happy that mine's been reduced. However, I get it. And I do though wonder about some of the legal desert counties that you are cutting so significantly.
Well, actually, that you're getting more though. I mean, Nevada is one example of a county that under last year's approach would have been subject to a $60,000 floor. You're now getting 80,000. So under this approach,
I understand, Mr. Iskin. I'm not happy about the big cut, the 123 to 60 to 80. And the initial governor's budget when it was at 123. But that's irrelevant. I am talking about counties like Alpine, Siskiyou, and so forth, who are legal deserts. And can they find respondents counsel for these reduced amounts? I think you should be talking to the counties about that.
okay. But, you know, for Alpine, like I just, you know, I guess we could look at Siskiyou. So yeah, they are a 37,000 You know, as you said, first of all, we can't really do anything about the fact that we now only have 17 million versus 45 million. I mean, that you're right, that's unfortunate, but there's not much we can do about that. So we have to do the best we can. Siskiyou, so they have 37,500. I didn't do, they only have 43,000 people. I don't know what the allocated caseload would be for that county. It's not going to be much. You know, again, if you assume 3,350 cases, which is the number we've been given by the state, allocated by population, you know, maybe they would get literally like anticipated to have 3 or 4 cases, right? They're getting 37,500. So, you know, they're getting over 10,000 a case, which is way more than
Yeah.
what the state estimated it would cost per case. They're actually doing better than LA, which is, you know, anticipated to be getting $6,100 per case.
And LA is not a legal desert. Siskiyou County is.
Yeah, I can or Eric, if it's appropriate, I can just sort of weigh in with State Bar staff has been thinking on this a bit too. You know, this is a really good point that Carrie has made. The with a much higher amount that obviously is just not a reality any longer. It was at the time State Bar staff's recommendation that even the smallest county, even Alpine, everyone get at least $60,000, even if their estimated number of petitions was like between 0 and 1 when you did the math, because the idea at the time was like, well, you know, you know, maybe they can use it for hiring or training, and you know, we don't know for sure how many petitions they're going to get. With a much lower number, there was like enough to go around at first. And with a much lower number statewide, it became necessary, I think from State Bar staff's perspective, to actually look at the amount of funding that would become available in each county per estimated petition or initial hearing. So, you know, like Kellen was saying, the 16,750,000 for the whole state comes out to be about, well, it comes out to be exactly $5,000 per estimated petition. And then when it's really unhelpful, I think, to try and estimate the number of petitions for each county, but the way we've been, because it's guesswork, but the way we've been doing it is looking at general population. So, you know, if you do that and you look at the amount of funding that each of the very, very small counties would get per estimated petition at the county level, they're often getting much more per petition than the urban counties are with the funding floor. But I completely acknowledge that just like the total amount that some of these very, very, very small counties would get just doesn't look like a lot on paper. Just I understand that, and I see that too. But when you look at the amount per petition, estimated petition at the county level, sometimes they're doing much better than the urban counties are.
Was there anyone else from the public who wanted to comment?
We actually did have someone else with their hand raised, but I think they might have lowered it, Eric.
On to Catherine then.
I think the other consideration that was important to me as we were working through this is to also think about what some of the smaller, more attorney desert counties, I think there was one last year where they had actually spent, and it was a relatively small amount of money, as I recall, $5,000 on public defender services. So I guess that to me also provided some way of evaluating what was likely to happen in the future, but you know, of course, no guarantee. And I certainly appreciate the point about our collective disappointment about the reduction in the funding. So I just wanted to acknowledge that agreement with Carrie's point.
And Melanie? I think you're muted, Melanie.
Sorry, I tried and I didn't do it. I just wanted to add to Carrie's point that we've heard, you know, from the courts also a concern, and it's different than the dollars in the attorney desert counties, those really small ones, and that is, you know, they might not even have a public defender, so they might have somebody contract, and then is that person willing to take on the representation, and if not, who would be, or if there's a conflict, who would be. And so I think that is a really valid point, and I just wanted to support her in making it.
Okay. Are there any other comments?
There are no other hands raised.
I will say, if if you're listening and you're just needing time to process, and your comment comes to you later, please email State Bar staff. So on the agenda for this meeting on the State Bar's website is Helen's, who's the committee's coordinators. Oh, it might actually be your phone number, Helen. I don't know if your email is on.
I know my phone number is definitely on there, but
Well, anyway, you have a way to contact Helen.
Yes.
So you're not limited to like this moment to share your thoughts. Like you can always call
Yes.
Helen.
Yes, you can call me or email me. My guess is if you are listening to today's call, you probably have my email as well at this point.
And we can share that if something comes in after the meeting, we can share it with the committee members. And the committee won't meet again though until July 15th.
So this was the only item on the agenda, and it was really intended to be a discussion item. So I will say for those who are listening that we can continue to consider this, and we can entertain comments or questions, and we'll be happy to do so. But I would say that it's probably fair to say that our current inclination at the July 15 meeting is to propose an allocation as reflected in this spreadsheet. So I'm going to let people know
Can you
that.
just confirm that, I mean, we have a couple of other commission members here. Just want to make sure they have a chance to ask any questions or give any feedback if they have it. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you know that, but just want to support you asking any questions you may have.
Vanetta or Jody, any thoughts or concerns or questions?
No, I agree with the assessment. Great presentation, very thorough, and recognizing the need of all counties in this very important project. But with that limited funding, puts in a position of trying to be responsive as all as prudent. So good job.
Thank you.
Yes, I don't have any concerns. It seems like an equitable solution, so I agree.
Well, thank you.
I will offer that staff can check in with some of the smaller counties to see if they have any thoughts on the formula. Perhaps they were not able to join today's call, so staff will reach out.
Okay, thank you, Helen.
Well, we want to make that offer, and insofar as it came up, to Carrie's point, if that's something the committee thought would be helpful, we could do that.
Yeah, I think it would be. Okay, that's the only item on the agenda. Does anyone have any further thoughts or comments or?
I think the only thing I'm going to add, Eric, is that as you and I have learned, that when we adjust upward, like smaller or mid-sized counties, that it has implications for other counties. So it isn't as simple as just listening to. I live in a more rural county, so I'm sympathetic to that perspective, and I think it's really complicated to come up in a place that it is more equitable than this across the board $60,000, which really became hard to explain, I think, and justify. So I think if we're reaching out to smaller counties, I just think we have to keep in mind that changes to their allocation will have implications for other counties in terms of what they're receiving. Like you can't just adjust one without reducing other counties. So that just trying to be mindful of what the impact is if we start doing that. Anyway,
That's a really good point, Catherine. It is a zero-sum game. Yeah, that's totally right.
There is a cap on the amount of money, and our job is to try and spend the money using our best judgment about what is wise. And there's admittedly a lot of unknowns that none of us know, because you know, there's a pretty small number of initial counties. So anyway, that's all. But thanks for chairing a good meeting, Eric. I thought the presentation was helpful.
Also from
Thanks
staff,
again
just
to
want to,
staff.
I want to like share the gratitude in the other direction. Eric and Catherine, Commissioners Iskin and Blakemore spent an enormous amount of time with State Bar staff running iterations, both in meetings and I think on their own time, and looking at these and assessing them. And so thank you, which is, I think we were very lucky to have you, for that, both of you were so generous with your time just to prepare for today's meeting.
Echoing Chris, thank you as well.
Yeah, it's good collaboration. Okay, so I guess we're done for the day then, right?
I think we are. Thanks,
Yep.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for making time. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.